Welcome to the new Kevin Smith, The Great Witness Show, the New Adventure series is. I'm Dean Bell, here with Dean Kevin, and we're going to hear Dean Kevin's experiences, real side experiences, comment, ask questions, and become more aware. So welcome, Dean Kevin from the UK.
In this real side experience, I would find myself with a group of individuals. My impressions were that they were those with the real intent and purpose of ears recognition and the process of awareness to that end. Impressions gleaned through the real awareness that is a part of the overall awareness that is everything, and this overall real awareness which then animates all personal selves and is through all the consciousness that the individual personal selves construct. And so, were we to remain with our awareness resigned to just the personal self, we can't see beyond the surface simulation we are presented with, and are rather at the mercy of potential tap lines through agreements we extend to the ideas we are confronted with, or the ideas that are the personal selves of the consciousness of those we allow into our experience, that may seem to be fine, but in fact are rather infused and laden with intentionality of ideas of which the personal self can't determine. Each idea and all that makes it up, each personal self-consciousness and the entirety of its thoughts, agendas, and intent are always behind the curtain of the surface, one-dimensional, literal, personal self-view, assuming the actions and motivations do not become apparent of those we engage with that suggest something other than what they are presenting themselves or their idea creations as. But as the real awareness is everything, and through everything created, in the nowness of its true reality, can we be provided additional insights and impressions that has all ideas of the simulation, the consciousness overall that effects it, laid bare. So regardless of what our considerations, convictions, and assumptions are of individuals or ideas, it is far better that we stand aside from the creations of the personal self, and through the nowness of our real awareness position, we are afforded impressions as to the intent of all that enters our experience, and indeed they may be very contrary to our assumptions about the individual or how they present on the surface. This is why children are a very good gauge of the intent of people, as they are not so encapsulated into the literalism of the mind as they later may become, as they become absorbed into the social indoctrinating one-dimensional literal consciousness, that children, like animals, know an individual's intent, as they simply can read it automatically through a real awareness that directly animates them, or that they are more connected with, as with the children that are not so rigidly locked into the illusions of consciousness ideas. But anyway, my group and I were stationed, it seems, on large vessels. The visual of the experience was rather limited. The personal self alone would have determined very little, but always the real awareness impressions afford greater clarity as to the situation. For again, what is visual is simulated, and the personal self alone can only make its determinations based on the visuals, and generally the personal self can only understand visuals it has experienced in its current memory of experience references. Anything beyond or aside from those references of what it has seen may make little sense, as the personal self will have no point of reference, like a computer that is unable to decode a game onto the screen properly, as it can't read or decipher all the coding, and we get just slivers and fragments of it, the parts of it that it can decode. And with the process of awareness demanding we always step into the unknown, which is what the personal self doesn't know or have references and experiences for, so must we more rely on the real awareness to fill in the blanks, as it were. And on some occasions we can have extensive and meaningful awareness bolstering experiences, but on the surface very little is taking place, and the bulk of it is through the real awareness impressions. Impressions we can only receive if we connect with the real awareness, stand in its nowness reality, and let life in, as it were, to show us more than we currently know and are aware of. For if we just had visual experiences that made perfect sense to the personal self, regardless of what they may be, then we only are ever standing in simulation. We never are stretching our recognitional ability, never learning to stand aside from the personal self and read the real awareness, isness input. That ultimately, if we want to stand in the reality of this isness that we are, we do rather have to be able to recognize it. And so, visual experiences are one thing, but only a step, as Dwayne says. On the real side are vast vessels, and like the UNUversal, UNUversities, these are positions where real intended individuals can be stationed, where their awareness can further benefit by being there. These would be positions and places in creation, simulated, yes, but experiences that reflect from the real intent of one becoming more aware with the sincerity to do so. as everything from experiences on the physical to the real side to positioning in life always equals our intent and what we decide. So as these vessels and UNUversities are an expression of the isness, so only will those with a real intent placed with the ears find themselves on the vessels or UNUversities on the real side, places that which mirror this isness placed intent. As I said, it was hard to determine through visuals alone what was taking place in this real side experience, more real awareness impressions. But it was as though we were going through a constant reordering, refinement, and adjustment that would allow our presence on these vessels, and indeed to continue to be able to be present upon them. For as these vessels are an expression of the ears, so must a sincere, real intent be maintained to be able to be with them on the real side. And it was as though, perhaps, what may have seemed to the personal self, with agreements through the consciousness, to the idea of the passage of time, of causes in, to effects out, as being of many months, or even years passing by, this maintenance and focus of a real intent had to be perpetuated throughout, for of course there will be fluctuation, a little back and forth. The personal self is very strong and adamant with the millions of lifetimes where it has had its way, and so a little up and down the scale from the nowness of the real awareness to the personal self is to be expected. But it's a case of what the overall intent is, and eventually, if maintained, the personal self will fade if our real purpose of is recognition remains our primary focus. But this scene did impress upon me the importance of the maintenance of a focus of overall is recognition, that it's all too easy to fall back, and so a constant aligning of the personal self, adjustments of the intent, etc., must be made, a going through the 5 body vehicles, that the personal self is aligned with the real awareness, real intent. For despite the awareness split between the personal self and the real awareness, it is the same awareness, and if the personal awareness is not 100% with the real intent, this represents an impossibility of standing with a true reality that requires an absolute intent to be with it, as anything less must be decision to be with what the isn't, and that's creation, and a single idea is enough to hold you to the effects of creation. It's very possible also that we could construe vessels or any boat really as a consciousness representing a building, much like any house, but that the boat then is above the waterline, a waterline of an ocean that can represent the psych realms. We might surmise this as representing also a consciousness that is, yes, one we must still deal with as we have our personal selves in creation, but one that we are stepping from the restriction agreement to, being above the water, as opposed to being beneath it and lost beneath the surface, immersed in the illusions of our consciousness simulation. But here in our boats, we are above the psych realms and open to the skies that represent the endlessness of the ears, and houses that represent the consciousness are so very fixed in place, like how rigidity of the consciousness can keep us so very limited and restricted. But a boat representing a consciousness suggests also not only a consciousness we are not resigning ourselves to, hence being above the water line, but a consciousness that is then more flexible, more fluid, that has motion, as we try new things, ventures, and ideas through what we share beyond the routines of the consciousness. The scene did switch, and what seemed to be taking place was some kind of space battle. The two opposing sides utilizing very different looking craft that made then each side very apparent. I would be standing on the ground, or a surface of a kind, looking skyward, in the company of a number of other individuals. The only one I recognized was Peter, my father. My impression was that this was taking place in the skies of the earth, and so very possibly a future view of a potential space battle that would be fought, and maybe for all the earth to see. What has been shared are future views of various alien arrivals, everything from the beneficial, supporting of life and guide-backed aliens to those with more nefarious and ill-intended agendas, with everything, any eventuality, only able to be so due to agreements that if maintained will facilitate which of the various future view options come to pass on the physical. Everything is shown as it is being decided and agreed upon in every moment in the nowness of the real side, aside from simulated cause to effect rollout of events that take the agreed to passage of time on the physical level. And so, for real side future views to be so on the physical, agreement must be maintained, and as agreement fluctuates, as it does, so must these future real side views. For in reality, everything is, everything must be that which it is, that which it intends and decides now, and so the real side always reveals decision and agreement as it currently stands for whatever it might be that we are being shown. So it's very possible that we might have rival aliens battling in the very skies, perhaps vying over control of the planet Earth. Or maybe the beneficial supporting of life and stepping up aliens become embroiled in a conflict with more ill-intended aliens, perhaps factions of the Dark Force controllers, as it has been revealed how it is reptilians, which were the specific species intending to be those that were involved with this mass alien arrival on Earth, reptilians that are assisting the guides and Dwayne. And so maybe it was a case of the making sense with life reptilians battling with the ill-intended controlling reptilians. For regardless of the reptilians' intentions, most are still relatively unaware, personal self-attitude driven, their consciousness very warlike, and so very easy it would be for the controllers to embroil the stepping up reptilians, those that are intending to arrive in spaceships en masse to the Earth, into a conflict. Interestingly, Peter and I and the others of the group, as we stood beneath this conflict, we were activating a technology that seemed to be beaming green streams of energy up to the ships, into the spaceships from both sides of the battle. Although this wasn't as a destructive means, but it was as though the green beams penetrated the ships and seemed to gradually de-escalate the situation, as though reducing the tensions and hostilities. As with any bullet or laser fire, anything that is a projectile, this rather represents ideas that, if agreed with, will impact their target. This was along similar lines, as though we were projecting then ideas, evidently based on the attempted resolution of this destructive situation, that were quite clearly being accepted, taken on board quite literally, and the result was a diminishing in the ferocity of the battle. It wasn't that we were successful in stopping it, but we eased it somewhat. For really, the respective rival aliens had to decide to stand down, and perhaps our beamers of green ideas were more along the lines of negotiating types of ideas. Or can it be, as in previous experiences I've shared, where it seems that the effects that species of aliens have decided for themselves can be worked creatively, that the guides, the real awareness, life, this overall real awareness that is through everything, can manage the effects to bring about beneficial outcomes? Can this be along the lines of maybe taking direct control of these species? The real awareness working through them, this same overall awareness that in fact operates all personal self-body types, and so is simply taking possession of what is the property of this real awareness overall. and these are the effects these attitude-driven aliens have brought upon themselves, which may seem somewhat unnerving to an individual who thinks they are separate from all others, but that is animated by the same overall awareness in reality, and the karma can be used in this manner. Drastic times call for such real awareness action, and with real awareness always making sense with the awareness that it is, does it always operate in a way, if allowed to do so, or if karma effects can be managed in such ways that always benefit awareness overall, despite how it might seem to the bewildered personal self? For a similar scene would follow, in which I would seem on the surface, visual personal self-view, to be an assassin of a kind, as I would be on assignment to track down various key dark force individuals that were in positions of power and influence, those that through the agreements they had, through the tiers of controllers, and through the overall simulator consciousness, that the controllers have the agreement permission to manage and influence, have great impact and bearing on the overall effect of the simulation, as they are in positions that could then swing agreement on a massive scale. I seemed to be stationing myself in strategic positions, targeting these key individuals and blasting them in the head with a sophisticated laser weapon. But again, the target that appeared on their foreheads would be the same green color as the beams of light which we were previously directing at the spacecraft that reduced their aggressions toward each other, and the laser beam I fired was a similar green translucent beam that didn't kill the target, just seemed to be absorbed into their heads, so suggesting a similar occurrence of ideas that make sense with life being accepted, or perhaps a direct intervention into their decision-making free will processes, a utilizing of the effects of a karma they had brought upon themselves. Seems that the dark forces had been alerted to my and the others of my group's efforts, and had deployed some agents, agreeing with the ideas of the simulated side would allow me to feature in the effects, and engaging with these dark force characters allowed others to enter my experience through them, as I had agreed to the idea of these target individuals, and all the interwoven ideas that made up their consciousness, their agreements, attachments, affiliations, like taking another individual's consciousness and installing it on your own computer simulation, and now you have taken on their simulation with all the ideas it consists of into your own, and open to all of the effects. I agree to a dark force character to incorporate them into my simulation, I take on and agree with all those that they are affiliated with and their subsequent intentionalities and inclinations, and have rather agreed to let potentially all manner of villains with their decided upon attitudes onto my film set, and then rather have to deal with them. And so the attack windows are opened, and in come the dark force agents, and I would spend a few moments engaging with them, amusing myself with little fighting scenes, knowing at any time I can disengage with the overall idea of what I was the current effects of, step back into my real awareness position, withdrawing agreement from the simulated side, and stand in the real awareness position aside from and beyond its reach. But if I chose to remain, and if what I was doing made sense to do so, would the real awareness provide that which I needed to handle the situation? And what was I doing then? Simply providing the experience these assailants had decided for themselves, they being the effects of their decided abrasiveness, instant karma. We do have the right to defend ourselves, and although we do rather progressively operate from a position beyond the need for altercation physically, as we can sidestep the simulated ideas with no need for such a defending of the idea that is our personal self, but sometimes, for whatever reason, we may not be able to switch as swiftly as we want aside from the simulated situations, if perhaps we are activating through the personal self, and so we may need to defend ourselves consequently. Either way, or however it works itself out, as long as we maintain our real intent overall, life, the real guides, and the real awareness will always provide what we need, assuming we don't block it through any conflicting ideas of the personal self, and we learn to move from the real awareness to the personal self according to what is required. If we need to engage with the simulation, or just view it from the real awareness that is aside from it. And when it comes to personal self-immersed individuals, dark controllers, or even stepping up aliens who haven't recognized their real awareness, we very much have to engage with them on the simulated side, the personal self-visual, literal side. For with a disconnect from the real awareness, so would any dealings with them, real awareness, being to being, not likely get through to their personal selves, as it is the personal selves we need reach, engage with, that then has the personal self-immersed awareness of the individual connect with the real awareness that they are, and then do we have a greater range and scope of interaction than just the simulated side with them. And there was a final scene where a group and I were engaging with monsters, as there seemed to be an arena of them in a designated enclosed area that contained them. The beasts seemed rather aimless, somewhat oblivious, but my impressions were that as on previous real side experiences, where beast slaying took place, often such monsters are thought forms rampaging through the real side of creation and conducting themselves according to the nature of the idea that they represent, the idea that manifested their creation. And constantly are all these abhorrent thought form monsters destroyed, as the real guides and agreeable individuals working with them remove these thought forms from the real side, or there they would remain and cause their mischief. Monster slaying can represent anything from a tapline removing to encounters with actual beings in monstrous form, to social consciousness representing. But this is another explanation for this type of experience, and such was my impression here, that they had been rounded up, enclosed in this containment area, and we were sent in to dispatch them, and they were the most twisted, weird-looking, description-defying monsters I'd ever seen, an indication then of the kind of thoughts that may have manifested them, and of the sort of activity or trouble that they may cause on the real side. And interestingly, we had the role or function of healers, or clerics as they are sometimes referred to in the computer games people play, a particular class that is tasked with keeping everyone alive through their healing magics. It was as though a representation then of a healing, a cleaning, purifying and maintenance of the real side, through this thought form removing, a little real side simulation spring cleaning. Dwayne the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "The big adventure is coming more so for those that can see it. Again, a heads up for what's taking place, and will continue as we have to deal with creation here. It's constantly confronting what's taking place throughout creation, and let's see what we can do to help as many people as possible to wake up."
Thank you. Couple thoughts here on that. You talked about the seeing things. So we have our imagination, which is, you could say, somewhat manufactured. It's part of the personal self and the creation worlds, but seeing the isness, or this reality just is, it's more like you're seeing what already is. You're not manufacturing it, you're just recognizing it for what it is. So you're not really adding to it, you're not doing anything but seeing it for what it is. And again, imagination is something that you mock up or conjure up to use, which is, it's a good thing, it's good, it's close to the real awareness, and it's a tool to use, but it's not the thing itself. seeing things for what they are more, you know, then you're in your real awareness, you could say. It's different. For me, it just kind of pops in. I just see it. You know, I just see something that is, and it's not something I conjured up. So as you become more aware, that's kind of how it happens. You just start seeing things that are there. You start recognizing things, and then you act. You decide. You do things appropriately with that awareness, so you can become more aware again with something that you don't know or are unaware of. You can kind of, maybe you can kind of work off that or not, probably not. Seems like you're always going into the unknown. No matter how aware you are, it's like you're always going into territory that you're not used to, you know, unknown territory. So that's the process, seems like. So, and then it becomes known, you know, after you do it, take the risk, and it becomes known. But then another day or another time comes, and then you're going into it again, kind of blindly. You just have to kind of blindly. Dwayne said that you just kind of take the risk, go for it blindly, because there's no way you can prepare to become more aware. In a way, you just kind of go for it, and then life will support your risk-taking activity there. It will support you. There's nowhere you can't do other than that, because you have sincerely taken the risk to become more aware of your intent, and it will support you in that endeavor. And you cannot fail, you could say, or cannot fall, because you're part of it, you know. REBISAR said, live in the danger zone. So this is part of that, where you're just constantly taking the risk, going into that unknown. And Dwayne talks about doing this in creation too, which is a part of this. I'm talking about the real awareness, but then in creation too, you do things that you're not comfortable with, or, you know, outside your comfort zone, just so you can get used to kind of like loosening yourself up. Do things you've never done before in the personal self, just to loosen yourself up and kind of make you more flexible. So you're not stuck in one position. So your tap lines aren't bothering you as much. You're more or less kind of more mobile, you know, more being able to handle things better too. If you're not self-convinced about a certain position. So awareness just is, it just is. So you see it for what it is. Again, imagination, it's mocked up, or you dream it, like you dream it. But seeing the awareness for what it is, the real awareness is just seeing what is already. You're not mocking it up. You can't do that, because it doesn't allow it. It's not part of creation and that process of imagination. It just is what it is. But with your real awareness, you can see this, that it's a different type of seeing this. The other thing I had was infiltrating. You say you're infiltrating this idea of, like, that's kind of what we're doing with Sheriff Mack, and we're infiltrating, you know, his organization, but, you know, for a benefit, but to utilize it for something of a benefit for everybody. That this is what the dark forces do. They infiltrate everything here that anybody is sincere about. They're going to infiltrate the NuPresentation someday. Like you had that experience the other day, Kevin, about the different chapters around the United States. But the real guides, they have this greater awareness, you could say, or this bigger viewpoint, so they can go and step into these situations and infiltrate, you could say, for the benefit of everything and everybody. And that's kind of what we're saying, you know, for when we say, or when I'm talking about infiltrating, but it's more or less, you know, since we do have, supposedly we're more aware, you could say, you know, of the bigger picture, we have access to these other viewpoints and being able to get or come at it from people and their viewpoints. You know, like, remember Claudie was sent over to this Asian fellow we were working with, who was supposed to be part of the funding. Well, she was sent there to see it from his viewpoint, basically step into his consciousness and see what he's seeing. And then she saw that he was, you know, he was not the risk taker. He was scared. He was like, didn't have the courage, passive, different things, but they're able to step into the consciousness, which is the creative part of ourselves, and see things. And then that's part of, like, you could say, infiltrating too. And then go from there, do something and arrange things, because they see the bigger picture, so they can kind of plan and manage things. And the real guides aren't really, they're not like overseers or dictators, but they manage more, and they can see, they can kind of, from their bigger viewpoint, they can arrange things, kind of give people a push or a hint, so things kind of fall in place to where everybody benefits. So it's really interesting how they work. The real guides, the silent ones more, from my understanding, are more to the mechanics of things, but the real guides are really active in maneuvering, contacting, like you do, Kevin, you know, doing missions, just from the greater awareness, doing things that benefit people and animals and the earth. Okay, Ronald, do you have anything, any comments before we go on?
No, I'm just trying to figure out the thing, like you guys are.
Okay.
Where we are, how we get into these agreements when we don't even agree to them. So how do we get out of them? I think you said it. You got to be like the guides, and that's where they're at, and that's where you got to work to. So you can see it all and know it all. When it happens, you know what to do. My way is I just consider everything, just try to just go with it and just see if you can just figure it out. Try not to get, not to get involved in the negative or the positive. Just stay above it, no matter what happens. That's the safest place to be, I think.
Yeah, kind of stay out of your own way. And I mean, I try to listen to the hints, the nudges, because that's very important. That life will always be showing you things, little things that you can act on. You can actually do something. That's how you can do something, is act on the nudges you get, the little things that you're shown in your dreams, or intuition, that kind of thing, your insight. Just act on it and then go with it. And it'll usually be something that you're not, again, you're going into blindly. But that's okay, like I say, life loves the risk taker, and you're taken care of no matter what happens, in a way. That's your self.
Well, I think that's what it's about. That's what the guides do. They it's more or less stay with you, and if you make a blunder, I think they try to help you out of it. I'm still trying to figure out how you stay out of it, how you stay above it. And that's the only way I can see it, is like I say, is staying in a neutral point where you're not creating karma. We're not battling the negative or positive forces, where you stay above it. That's the only way I can figure it out.
It's figuring it out, although you can't possibly figure it out, but you do have to figure it out. So it's a paradox in a way, but you kind of have to see it, you know, it's a seeing it. But in a way, you have to figure out how to get in a position where you can see it. You know, that's more how I see it. You position yourself so you can see it, because the figuring out part is like the creational part. The seeing part is not that. It's not going to be creational or personal. It's going to be just seeing it for what it is. And that just comes, you know, with your intent, sincerity, you'll be shown. Okay, Kevin, over to you.
This real side experience would begin with me seemingly editing the latest Jeopardy show we had made, the Alien UFO Jeopardy show. What we do, decide, what we agree with, extends far further than we might realise, as from the personal self-perspective, very little may seem to be happening on the physical life level. But for every individual decision made, every intent set, and agreement ventured, so is the overall consciousness altered in accordance. And as we place our intent, so does our intent ripple through the multi-dimensional nature of ourselves and all creation, not only on the physical, but the real side also. It does seem that the more aware an individual becomes, and the more they move into their real awareness position, the greater impact their decisions have through the simulator. A simulator that is the consciousness affected, a consciousness that we are a part of as we operate in creation with our created personal selves. For it is effectively one real awareness that is through all the seemingly separated endlessness of personal created selves and consciousnesses. And as we step more so into this real awareness, that is, this everything reality, and is through the entirety of our creation, that it effects through all the consciousness vehicles it animates, so we will begin to automatically more operate from a position of always making sense with life, making sense with the reality of what we are, this real awareness, which expresses as supporting awareness and life in all that we do throughout the multi-dimensional nature of our created self. For we switch more so from a position of catering to the personal self, of putting our created simulation of restricting ideas before the whole of life, a position that, if maintained, is quite the opposite of supporting awareness and life, as it generally is based on a distortion of restriction and control that rather infects the consciousness and adds to the demise of the simulator, a simulator which deteriorates in equal measure to the distortion that affects it, switching into more so a standing with the isness reality our real awareness. That is all about itself. As in reality, it is everything. And so, what else would everything be about realistically, other than itself? The personal self then becoming more secondary and gradually fading into the background as just the vehicle that it was designed for, just the tool by which we can go through our process in creation and recognize that which we actually are, this all aliveness, real awareness. And so, as we transition to putting the whole of life first, which is what we actually are, not the personal self we have created, what we do then always makes sense with the real awareness that we are, that is everything, operating in a creation that is beneficial awareness speaking, always sharing that which references the is, the promoting of the true reality, and not sitting in a personal self-consciousness agreement that is a part of the engine of simulator destruction through the restriction its consciousness comprises of, and continuing to add more distortion through that which we decide that is only about the personal self and the ideas it creates and chases that have nothing to do with life other than reference it through the comparison of that which it isn't. The personal self then, in its self-satisfied and convinced position of illusion, will operate in very limited ways, enough that its wants and desires are satiated, but nothing will it do that is not personal self-serving, and content will it be in the bubble of illusion it has created, and only will it have engaged with other created personal selves and ideas to the extent that its wants can be fulfilled. The real awareness, however, once connected with, and with the real intent of is recognition embraced, and the stepping more so into a real awareness position, whereas we do, the personal self is more in the background, and we are operating then from a making sense and supporting of life position that is all awareness. So will we be operating, taking on and engaging with creation on a greater scale, and not just in a limited way that is enough that the personal self can maintain or chase what it wants. And as such, the more aware we become, the more we embrace this position of supporting the whole of life that we are. This then has us extending ourselves far more through the multi-dimensional personal self and the simulation to reach as many individuals as we can, to face the whole of life, to get agreements throughout creation, the physical and the real side, to take on all the effects of doing so, all through the want to support life that we recognize more and more as being the only thing that there really is to do, as life, awareness, is everything. So naturally, a recognition of the aliveness, awareness that we are, would impress upon us how this is really the singular purpose, supporting that which we are a part of, until eventually, as we move into the complete real awareness position, we must express completely as that which is in complete support and promotion of that everything that we all are, this isness, aliveness, reality. So, as I said, the more aware we become, the greater impact we have on creation, as our real intent expresses far greater through the simulation, throughout the real side life is, and is a constant, despite the personal self only being able to have but real side experience glimpses of the full magnitude of what's taking place. As Dwayne says, as we become more aware, we have a greater effect on the simulator, and so when it comes to offsetting the simulator situation, the real intent and real awareness recognized by one individual can have a greater bearing in creation than who knows how many billions of unconscious personal self-immersed beings, who each will be adding to the demise and distortion, but their individual impact really quite marginal in comparison to an individual operating throughout creation and touching the entirety of it as best as their awareness allows, in a way that supports life and awareness. And so, when it comes to these projects we do on the physical, sometimes as limiting in their reach as they may seem to the personal self, they are extending throughout creation, throughout the multi-dimensional nature of it, the real side life is, and impacting in ways the personal self can't be possibly shown as to the full magnitude of. And I have seen our Skypes and shows broadcasted across the real side, and including the Jeopardy alien UFO show that at the time of this real side experience had only been recently created. As on this real side experience, the Jeopardy show would reverberate multi-dimensionally throughout the real side. And it must be acknowledged also that at the moment I had this real side experience view, I hadn't actually as yet edited the Alien Jeopardy video and put it out on any media platform, and yet just by having the show, that to the personal self would seem that only half a dozen or so people would be aware of it, those that participated in it at the point where it hadn't yet been edited. Did it still feature across the real side for all to see? But of course, we do need to present on the physical, as it is the personal selves we need to get the attention of. And although the personal selves extend to the real side life is, with unconscious, one-dimensional personal selves overwhelmingly, you need to get their attention from a level of life they have their focus and attention with, which would be the physical level. And yes, that which occurs on the real side must filter through to the physical, as everything does, but people, being so enclosed in their personal, one-dimensional view that they are, not always will they get the subtleties that filter from the unseen parts of their personal selves. So we do need to get attention on the physical, ideally, but the seed is planted through that which we do that features across the real side, like these various shows that become multi-real side dimensional. And then really everyone in creation has been primed and prepped to receive the real references, and although it falls on them to decide to proceed with it, that which we do on the real side has greased the wheels, as it were, and made it more likely that even the most unconscious, self-convinced individual must see something in what we are presenting if they come across it on the physical, even if they do pretend not to, and try and bury themselves in their personal self-bubbles of denial of what is real. Also, on this real side experience would seemingly be a situation where the guides I suggest were taking advantage of the karma, the effects that the dark forces had generated for themselves in a way that was beneficial with the whole of life. For of course, the real guides do nothing but operate in such a way, as they are this isness aliveness that they support. So it makes sense really to support that which you and everyone actually is. Everyone has the free will to decide and choose what they will, to have and create as they see fit in the simulators, but bear in mind that the effects will always mirror that which you do decide. When it comes to the dark forces and their creations, their ideas are among the most destructive, distorted, and nonsensical, and they have garnered agreement throughout the simulator to their ideas, that then has a simulated matrix of control according to their design parameters through the consciousness agreements they have secured to make it so. And as much as they may have had their fun, the effects do show up eventually, and at this stage the effects rather are due, and the effect of themselves will be to be lost in the darkness of an imploding simulator that they had been instrumental in effecting through the restricting ideas they had created and gotten everyone to agree with. But rather than just let the dark forces experience themselves their decided distortion, the guides can work with the effects the dark force folks have created. Their karma can be workable in beneficial ways. This, of course, isn't an imposition or free will violation, but are the effects that the dark forces have free will manifested for themselves, effects that can be worked in creative ways with respect to free will, but within the effect parameters the dark forces have walked into. The guides can throw these individuals into the phantom zone, for example, again based on the decisions of those that find themselves there, our positions in life always reflecting what we decide, or the guides can leverage them, that should the dark forces cooperate, the guides will alleviate their karmic debt, take on a little of their effects, and work them off, as their cooperation, their agreement to assist beneficially with life, will effect less dire circumstances for themselves, as everything equals itself, and this equaling and balancing expresses as circumstance and positioning in life. But on a previously recounted real side experience, I would have the real awareness actually take direct control of my personal self on the physical for a few moments, with personal self agreement naturally, the personal self agreeable with and aligned with the overall real intent of the real awareness, which then had this situation be so. For just as it is on the real side, the personal self rather takes a back seat ideally, unless we need activate it for various experiential reasons. But the personal self simply observes what transpires as the real awareness takes control of situations and does what the personal self would not know how. And this seemingly can be so on the physical also, with situations that demand the real awareness overriding the personal self to carry out that which the personal self would not know how to do, as I briefly experienced, as I had to position the physical vehicle just so to receive something beyond the personal self's ability to understand, and so were it left to the personal self, it would not have done what was required. This real awareness taking direct control is interesting an idea, and to experience on the physical level, for the real awareness animates all the consciousness, but is rather in the background when it comes to the personal self immersed, one-dimensional, unconscious individual, a disconnect that renders effectively two individuals, the personal self and the real awareness, but with the personal self oblivious of the real awareness, so operating as it thinks is best for its personal self. But even if the personal self doesn't realize it isn't actually real, that it's just a created vehicle, that which has created it, that animates it, waits for the day when the personal self decides to see more than the simulation of itself and connect with the real awareness that until then remains separated from the personal awareness. However, what I saw in this real side experience also appeared to be another creative way the karma of the dark forces can be worked beneficially. For I would have a view of what seemed like a military unit breaking into various houses on the real side. My impression was that these were dark force houses, and representing the personal selves of the individuals as houses do. This revealed the seeming infringement of this military unit into the personal selves of these dark force individuals that the houses represented. Interestingly, I seemed to be stationed in these houses also, and at first my personal self was trying to prevent the entry of these military characters, as though it didn't perhaps recognize at first what was taking place, thinking this was some kind of intrusion, that yes, were intrusions into the experience of dark force characters, but imposition nonetheless, and my personal self would consider such to never be justifiable, and express this by trying to prevent this forced entry. But the military would just barge past me and proceed with their personal self-invasions of various dark force houses on the real side. My impressions then were that these military types were actually the real guides. That they often assume military forms isn't uncommon, as this best expresses their focus and discipline, their singular supporting of life, a constant operation that is best represented by the discipline you see with military types. How can guides feature in the experience of individuals on the real side? They have to have agreement that they can be part of the simulation of the personal self, and impart their sharings and experiences for our awareness purposes. For the self-convinced unconscious individual, including the dark forces, very little, if any, can the guides feature and get through to a simulation that is closed to them agreement-wise. But wait, the dark forces can operate through other individuals that we agree with, in that if we open up to a seemingly sincere individual, but their consciousness is intertwined with that of agreements to the dark force reptilians, as all consciousness must be, over the lifetimes of continuous dark force agreements, we are agreeing to more than we see on the surface. We are agreeing to an overall idea of a consciousness festooned with reptilian control agreements that allows the reptilians to feature now in our experience, as we have effectively agreed to them through the individual we opened up to, even as said sincere individual is oblivious of being a tap-lining agent and a conduit for the dark forces. And so, as the consciousness of all is intermeshed with the reptilians, made apparent by the simulator of reptilian control, experience must reflect a consciousness agreement, as is the nature of cause and effect. The agreements bind the slaves to the slave masters. So can each then feature in each other's simulated experience. And just as the reptilian dark forces can worm their way into our experiences as we open up and agree with individuals, that through their agreements to the controllers allow the reptilians access, so this works the other way also. If the dark forces agree to me, they also agree to that which I represent, my intent and ideas also, that can then feature in their experience, and not just the surface visual idea of my created vehicle. But really, it's not that I need seek agreement to feature in their experience, as our consciousnesses are intertwined by virtue of the agreements already present in the consciousness of all in the simulator, a consciousness the reptilians have made it their business to forge agreements with, that they can feature in the experience of all and create the simulation through the moulding of the overall consciousness into a design that they desire. The door swings open both ways. The dark forces, through their intermeshing of a consciousness with all, are as much enslaved to the effects of dealing with the controlled as the controlled are to being subjugated. And should I then choose to feature in the dark forces' personal simulation through the open agreements that infuse their consciousness with mine and everyone's, they then effectively are openly agreeing to not just what they see on the surface also, but my ideas and intent, and that would be my real intent, and my affiliation and standing with the real guides also. So effectively, the guides can't feature in enclosed, encapsulated bubbles of a personal, self-convinced simulation, but they can, through the agreements that the unconscious individual has with one who is in agreement with the guides, a kind of agreement backdoor, if you will. The dark forces feature in our experience through the agreement conduits of others, for as we become more aware, we can move from the personal self-consciousness, where they can constantly feature, to a position where they can only infringe on our simulation through a conscious direct agreement on our part, through their deceptive creations, ideas, or through other individuals. But just as they do that with us, so it works both ways. A personal self-consciousness that they constantly stand in, that is an open door for myself to feature in their experience through agreements that the consciousness has with them, through the way it has been programmed over the lifetimes. But the guides also can feature in their experience through me, and this would be the case here, as my agreements that the consciousness is constructed of could allow my entry into their personal self-homes, and then in turn allow the entry of the real guides. That at first I thought was an intrusion, but realized in fact the real guides were using the backdoor method into experience, and also through the effects that the dark forces had created for themselves. For my impression was that just as I had had the experience where my real awareness had taken direct control of my physical vehicle, overriding the personal self, so were the guides doing just this. The guides, which are a part of this allness, real awareness that is everything and animates all the separated personal selves, even if the personal selves don't realize or recognize this and think they are real. The guides were taking control of the personal selves of these dark force individuals, that these houses they were busting into represented. Again, not an imposition or free will violation, but working with the effects that the dark forces had brought upon themselves by their decided abrasive restricting creations. And I had the impression that this overall real awareness, the real guides, were taking control then of these dark force characters and would manipulate them like puppets. But of course, for beneficial, making sense with life purposes, and who knows how this will play itself out on the physical. Maybe these particular dark force characters had key influential positions in the dark force controlling hierarchy, that the decisions they make have great ramifications throughout the controlling systems, and consequently shape the very simulator through all the agreements they have, that they can swing overall effect back and forth, and now directly under control of the guides. Perhaps we might see some interesting shake-ups in the decision-making through the controlling systems in the moments to come. Again, it sounds kind of like possession, but really it is this one real awareness that animates all body vehicles. So if the circumstances are right and karmic debt allows, why shouldn't the real awareness, the guides, step in and take direct control of what is, after all, their created vehicles, regardless of what the personal self thinks? The personal self will have to put up with the effects it has brought upon itself. And then the scene switched, and a similar operation taking place, only this time it was as though the military unit, the guides, were invading dark force personal selves that were represented not by houses this time, but by boats. And yes, there I was, still present, as the back door effectively for this to continue to take place. Only now I recognised what was going on, and lounged about on the various boat beds as the military task force surged into each boat in turn. Some boats small, suggesting one individual, some vaster and with a number of passengers, suggesting more a collective consciousness. For yes, these boats were the equivalent of homes, so still representing the personal self of these dark force characters. That they were as boats suggested to me that this represented how that through direct control of the personal selves, through real awareness, the guides, that the personal selves were above the waterline that separates the psych realms of simulated immersion from the real awareness isness above it, that regardless of the personal selves of these dark force characters, that they would be content to remain operating in creation in a controlling capacity, to be beneath the waters and continuing to add distortion and destruction to overall experience through the agreements they had, that they were now operating from a position of making sense with life, connecting with that which is aside from the waters of psych realm creation. And even though they might think that this was not what they decided for themselves, this was the effect of what they had in fact decided, their karmic cause to effect debt. So really they had decided it, and as a consequence they would see more than what they had resigned themselves to creation-wise by virtue of doing that which was beneficial. And with everything equaling itself, so would they be operating above the waterline of the simulation of what they had resigned themselves to with their decided consciousness, and aptly this would be represented as their personal self-houses in boat form. So an interesting turn of events, and if my recognition of the situation was accurate, then it looks like another method being employed to help offset the simulator situation. And as strange as it might seem, or even abrasive, it is overall for the benefit of all, including the dark forces, whose personal selves were taken direct control of. For after all, we are all these free beings of light, struggling to recognize that which we are, and the dark forces may not necessarily like this situation, their personal selves won't at any rate, but it is actually for their benefit and survival, as they are this real awareness everything also, that's sole purpose is about itself, its survival, and the awareness isness that it is. Dwayne the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "You had the experience of what we're doing, the fun shows, the jeopardy, etc. It's a fun way to get things out, and you see how this works now. The guides have a lot of fun being tricky and taking these attacks and things like that and utilizing them for a benefit that comes around. They get to utilize it in any way they can, and they take on that position and deal with it, just like I do here, and the attacks, etc., and I've had many brutal ones. But this helps bring things around. That's a greater benefit for everyone. I had an experience the other evening on the real side. It was about Darwin Gross, who was the supposed master of Ekankar after Paul had left. I knew Darwin very well, and would have experiences with Darwin on the real side, and I saw him the other night, and I went up to him and shook his hand, because this is the ceremonial position of Darwin still on the real side. He thinks of himself a particular way, and that people should approach him and acknowledge him. Well, I did this for a reason, and as I shook his hand, I said, I am going to do something that no one has ever done. And as we were shaking hands, he kind of jerked a little bit. He was a little bit concerned and said, "Be careful." Then I stood to his right and watched several other people approach him, and that was the experience, very brief and real. I approached Darwin to give him the chance to step up to what we're doing and take the risk, to get out of his personal self, because he's still there, he's still locked in and lost. But he really wasn't interested. He's only interested in people seeing him for what he thinks he is. I gave him the chance, and that's where he kind of jerked back a little, and was a little bit concerned for a moment, and said to be careful. In other words, he doesn't want to take the risk. He wants to stay the same. So he was given that opportunity. I gave him that opportunity simply because he has a lot of connections. So we will see what takes place, and as people see us on the real side and here, they're going to see that we're the only ones that make sense. All the old stuff had its place, even when Paul was here. All the books, the teachings, etc., referring to that experience someone shared a while back on the Skypes, where the bookshelves full of Paul's books fell down, and the individual whose experience it was got cut. This is the old stuff. Yes, I'm grateful for what he's done. Paul and REBISAR, etc., they're always with me. We're doing this. We're deciding to do this. and see who will step up. But the old ideas don't have any merit anymore. You have to step up and be real. Take your place. Earn your way. That's how it is. There's no free rides. And it just gets better for those that do. And anyone can do it if they have the courage to do it and face the entire world and all the real side, etc. Step up because this is very real. This creation is imploding. That's very real too. You can look outside and things look fine, but it's an illusion. And we're here to wake up all the way. This is the time to do it. I'm very grateful that I have the awareness to see this, do this, and share this with everyone.
So the real guides have a huge influence, basically as potential. The way I see it is potential and possibility, because if people don't even know about them, then they don't even exist. And that's what we're doing, bringing out the real guides and the possibility that people have. Even the Ekkas, some of the Ekkas, Dwayne said, come up to him and say, is REBISAR real? They don't even know or believe or think he exists. So if you don't see them as real or existing, then they don't exist, basically, and you're still in creation, and you don't have that possibility that they're bringing out. They're bringing out potential in us. That's how they are influential in creation. Otherwise, you're just going with the old stuff, religion and spiritual stuff, and the old leaders who lead you to wherever, sound good, heaven, truth, wisdom, love, all that sound good stuff that really goes nowhere now. Maybe in the past, but not now. Well, in the past, this kind of opportunity wasn't available, but now it's a new day, and those who recognize the real guides and their position and have the possibility to wake up. And again, it's not about a savior thing. It's about you do it your own way. They're just there as guides. And the dark forces, you could say, the controllers, they don't even see that they have the public hoodwinked, but they don't see that they're hoodwinked too, that they think by their control, they have this, awareness, certain awareness or possibility, but so that even the controllers don't see where they're going with this, with what they're doing. They think they're going to have it kind of forever. It's always going to be here. Even just like the public sees, well, things have been going on the way they have. They're going to go on the way they, will in the future. Things will just be normal eventually. The controllers are kind of the same way. They have this idea that things will they'll maintain control and things will go on, even though they see, the potential of destruction and the darkness, but they don't really recognize it. Just like the public doesn't recognize, the planet's dying, but something will happen to make it better, and somebody will come in, because it's the way it's always been, so it's going to be that way forever. And the guides use it's not imposing on others. If they have this karma, they can so-called impose upon a person and just be the karmic results, or use the results of the karma the person has to do something to manage the situation, because that's just the way the mechanics work here in this creation.
Kevin, can you give us a definition of what the foresight is that you operate from? Paul talks about the lower heavens and higher heavens. So when you say the other side, where exactly are you working from?
The other simulated dimensions of life, which would incorporate potentially anything that is affected from the overall consciousness into simulation. So for anything, because anything you see visually must be the simulation. And so it could be anything that stems from any individual collective consciousness, and however that expresses on the real side in whatever forms it does. It's not very easy to pinpoint exactly where you're going, but all you can determine is that according to what you are engaging with will determine the effects that you are then within the simulation of. And so when you're dealing with individuals, when you're in their experiences or in a sort of a scene that incorporates other individuals, then you will obviously be featuring in the simulation that they are affecting through their consciousness. And when it comes to experiences that the guides show you, they very often will either utilize experiences that already have been created and are out there, because as you can imagine, throughout the entirety of the history of the simulator, there's probably been every possible experience scenario you can possibly imagine. And so very often the guides will simply select something that has already at some point been created, and they may tweak it a little bit and add their own little unique nuggets of features and representations so that you can become aware of something they wish to convey. Or the guides will simply create something from scratch themselves. And then, of course, as you are in agreement with the guides, so can you then feature in that which they then create and effect into simulation also. So you can walk into their little created scenarios that they construct for you. And so, yeah, so it's very hard to pinpoint exactly where you are. I mean, you can go on to specific life levels, and if you are aware enough, or even just ask somebody while you're there, you can determine which life level you happen to be on. But generally, I mean, all the life levels themselves are just simulated realms anyway. So basically, everything's visual is a simulation, and it just depends on what of the simulation you are deciding to go into as you go about your various assignments of reaching people, trying to give them the opportunity of the ears, and doing what you do generally. So, yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is that in book 2, I think it's video 4, Dwayne talks about going over through the heavens into the higher heavens, and has that changed? Because I get back to this question about, since the reptilians and the religions have more or less established the lower heavens, does that all still exist, or is that all changed?
Well, everything exists only if you decide and agree to it. So, and so in regards to simulation, if it changes in any shape or form and you find yourself in a changed simulation, you must then have altered the agreements that then affect you to be able to be in the simulation that is now changed. And so you can have effectively simulations within the simulations and various nuances and variations of the same thing, all according to what agreements you have made. And obviously with the reptilians, they want everybody's consciousness to be very regulated and maintained and in agreement to exactly the simulation they want affected. And that would include also the individuals who are locked into the reptilian controlled consciousness seeing a simulator overlap, which isn't exactly as the simulator is in reality, because I've seen, and many other people have, and Dwayne has also described, this great darkness that is spreading throughout the simulator, which is the effect overall of the unconsciousness. And so literally at this moment in reality, every life level from the physical to the ethereal is shrouded in a great darkness, but we can't see it because our decoding equipment, if you like, that for each vehicle of each life level has been tweaked in that it isn't decoding exactly what the simulator looks like, but the way that the reptilians want us to see it, so that we don't see a simulator shrouded in darkness, which of course then would probably cause a lot of individuals to panic and more likely have them want to be extricated from it. And part of the controller's game is they want everyone to stay in the simulator as their agreement supporting slaves. So they certainly don't want any individuals to see the simulator as it actually is, and then want to extricate themselves from it. So yeah, the simulator. I mean, the more you remove yourself from the consciousness, the more you step into your real awareness. A real awareness that is through everything created, because everything created must stem from consciousness, and this real awareness that you and everybody is this one overall awareness that is through all consciousness vehicles that animates then the simulation affected from it. So can then you be in a position where you can operate and be in anything simulated that is everything of which is in the nowness and accessible through your real awareness now. And so you're not so limited as a one-dimensional personal self-immersed individual would be, being limited to just the reptilian managed consciousness and therefore the managed simulation that stems from it. And so, yeah.
Well, I think it's easier for me I'm more comfortable with just thinking or saying that all the etheric all the way down to the psychic is they no longer exist in my mind. And so what do you think about that?
Well, they exist in that they will, if you have if you have a created personal self, because the created personal self through all the 5 vehicles of it, combined with all the other created personal selves of everybody, which creates a sort of collective consciousness and a collective, if you like, series of 5 vehicles which affects the corresponding life levels. As long as you have a created personal self, your awareness will be, you will have your real awareness that animates through it, but your real awareness is within these vehicles that then must have you perceiving these simulated realms and all the life levels that spin off from the 5 vehicles. So I mean, even though this is simulated and it isn't real, it is very real it is very real as in from the perspective of the personal self, because even though it's simulated, it is still a reality in which you experience through the personal self vehicle, as long as you have a personal self. And so you can think that it's not real, and indeed it isn't, because what is real is, of course, the isness, which is the true reality aside from the simulation. But nevertheless, you will be experiencing this unreal simulated reality as long as you have a created personal self within it. And at the point when you no longer need to have a simulated personal created self is that point when you recognize the is from all the comparisons that creation represents, and that you have decided to let go of all the ideas of creation that no longer bind you to the simulation.
What creates karma? What are you going to do? What do you do basically to create karma? My theory is, as long as you don't hurt someone or damage someone's property, that more or less would escape the karma. Am I close?
Well, karma is basically cause and effect. They're the same thing. So basically, wherever you create, you become the effect of, and everything in creation is comprising of ideas. And that's everything from thoughts to emotions to imagination, because everything starts on the real side through those vehicles as imagination. It passes through the literal parts as thought into the emotion part, and then it will then manifest as it does on the physical level through the agreements, through the consciousness that affect the laws, so-called laws of physicality, or the agreements of time and space and distance. But basically, you can't not be creating something, because as long as you're in creation, you will always be activating some thought or something. But the only difference is that wherever you create, you're not clinging to. And so that's why Dwayne always emphasizes the importance of being in the nowness of your real awareness. In other words, if you do that, then you're standing in a position where you're not in agreement with your consciousness and all the ideas it comprises of, because everything you've ever created is filed in your consciousness like a computer. And of course, then if you sit, if you sit in that consciousness, then you are basically in agreement with it, and so it will always be affecting that which it comprises of. And so you can't not create, and you can't not create karma for yourself. But the difference is, A, you are conscious of it, and B, you're not clinging to anything of it, and C, because you're standing in the nowness of your real awareness, you are in that position. You are beyond then the effects of the ideas you are creating and that which are already in your consciousness. And although they will create experiences in this lifetime, the difference is with most individuals, when they transition, they are very much immersed in their consciousness. They're very much clinging on to all the ideas of it. And so as they cling on to all the ideas of it, they are agreeing to the continual projection of them, which then project them into future lives, which then is simply their decision to continue to experience what the ideas of their consciousness comprises of. And so the key is that it's not necessarily that you avoid creating things or you don't create anything at all, but it's just that you are now conscious that you will be the effects of what you create. And you're also now aware that if you maintain your nowness, real awareness position, and you retract agreement from your consciousness, then you will not be projecting into future lifetimes.
A couple things from me. Still, Dwayne talks about the attacks that he's had, and the real guide's letting it through because that way they can take care of the dark forces. They've created karma, and then the guides can step in and do act appropriately. Otherwise, they don't have that opening. And then the last thing I have is like something Dwayne talks about is it's sort of an extension of the taking the risk idea, where look at things. You have this routine you go through every day, your daily routine. Look at things in a different way if you can, either through other people's viewpoints, become another person, or do things or see things differently. There's always different viewpoints, different angles, different approaches. So practice seeing things differently, because we're so routined every day. We get up, we have the same routine. It kind of helps you to loosen up again, to see. So, and that carries on into the real side too, that you're more flexible, you're more open, and to you're not so set in certain ways of thinking or being or considering, or even your consciousness. You're just more fluid, and you can handle things better through this different viewpoint. Also see things to the end. If you do set something up, okay, so Ron, you said, okay, so I don't believe in, as long as I don't harm somebody, take that idea, as long as I'm not harming anybody, I'm not creating karma. So that's like an idea you've created. Whether it's true or not, whatever, but it's an idea you created. So see that through the end. See where that goes. Look at it from start to finish and things along the way. This is an idea. Where's that going to go? Or any idea you have, relationship with somebody, or some project you're starting. See it all the way through to the end. Seeing the effects of it. Kind of have an overview of the whole thing. So again, it's practice, like Paul said, getting in and out of things. Okay. Anything else? Anybody?
And part of the process is as well that you must face the whole of your created self, and the bulk of which is the subconscious, which are all the tap lines, the agreements, and attachments you have made throughout all the entirety of your lifetimes. Because even in your current lifetime, you have your current new memory vehicle, which can only know the references and experiences from your current lifetime. There still are all the tap lines that you have agreed to throughout the entirety of all your zillions of lifetimes you've had up until this point. And it's as though they are all still there and are all still as almost open files on your computer, and therefore constantly generating the effects, and the tap lines are present for you. And so part of the process is you have to face the entirety of your consciousness and your subconscious. You have all the tap lines unveiled to you, and then it is your decision then to release them. And so that's a process that each individual goes through as far whatever pace that they do, and that is a lot of which will be a constant going on the real side. And you can't possibly imagine that will be shown everything of that. I mean, I share a fair degree of the sort of tap line experiences that I have, and a lot of times when you release tap lines from past lifetimes, you also see the associated world and dimensional life that you had where you forged those tap lines, almost like a little like therapy, like when the psychologists put someone in the chair, when they unlock certain memories they've suppressed, they'll suddenly see the visuals of it in their mind and maybe dream about it. And so it's a little lot along those lines. You'll always see the associated imagery with the tap line where it was forged. And so that is part of the process, and that is ongoing and continuous. And the guides will always be taking you through that on the real side. And so it's always a case of always being open and in agreement to getting through the personal self and all the tap lines of the subconscious, that it will unfold eventually to the point where they are all released, and then you have pretty much opened up the whole of your consciousness. You are conscious of the entirety of it, and then at that stage you can just step aside from it. But in the very least, you are no longer the unconscious effects of your tap lines. And so you are more in a position where you can now pick and choose that which you directly want to experience, and no longer at the mercy of tap lines and causes that are all constantly firing, in which individuals and situations can suddenly appear in your life, and you wonder where that came from. But these are just potentialities that stem through a subconscious yet to be faced, addressed, and all the tap lines released. And so that's another major part of it, and that's a process that is continuous basically for as long as you maintain your real intent to recognize the is. So you don't really need to have to concern yourself with it really. It will just unfold in accordance with the real intent you have set with the recognition of the is, and the simulated side will follow. So that was what I was going to say.
And one way to release or loosen up those tap lines is the NUUU. And that's where we'll end today. NUUU. Ronald? Kevin?
NUUU.